February 28, 1942, Camp Elliott, San Diego, California. The pencil hovered above the paper as Major James Jones observed something that defied every rule of military cryptography he had ever been taught. 4 Navajo men stood before him, transmitting combat messages in 20 seconds flat. Communications that would have taken encryption devices half an hour to encode. The words coming through the radio were utterly foreign, unlike anything he had ever heard. Yet, these 4 men, recruited only days earlier from Los Angeles, translated each message flawlessly, instantly, without a single mistake. Major Jones had spent 2 decades in military communications. He understood codes. He understood ciphers. He knew that cracking enemy transmissions could decide wars, and that the Japanese had already proven capable of breaking every American code system in operation. The Marines were losing the cryptographic battle before they even set foot in the Pacific. But what he saw that morning would alter the course of military communications forever. 420 Navajo Marines would eventually devise the only unbreakable code in modern warfare. A cipher so precise that Japan's top intelligence officers would later confess they never even approached deciphering it. Yet the story does not truly begin in 1942, but 24 years earlier. In October 1918, 8 Choctaw soldiers serving with the American Expeditionary Forces in France were assigned to telephone duty during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They spoke to each other in their native tongue. The Germans, who had been monitoring American phone lines and deciphering every message, suddenly went silent. They could intercept the transmissions but could not comprehend a single word. The Choctaw language belonged to the Muskogean linguistic family, native only to North America. No German codebreaker had ever encountered it. The 8 Choctaw Code Talkers gave U.S. forces a critical advantage in the closing months of World War I. But the lesson was soon forgotten. The program ended when the war did, its achievement filed away and largely ignored, until December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor exposed a frightening weakness in American military communications. The Japanese were deciphering U.S. codes nearly as quickly as they were sent. Japanese intelligence had been preparing for conflict for years. Their cryptanalysts had already broken the Gray Code, the Brown Code, and numerous other systems. By early 1942, the situation had grown desperate. The Japanese could intercept American radio traffic and decode it within hours, sometimes within minutes. Worse still, fluent English speakers among them began transmitting false orders, setting up deadly ambushes. Major Howard Connor, who would later command the Navajo Code Talkers at Iwo Jima, summarized the crisis. Every code we used, the Japanese broke. Every cipher, every encryption method, every mechanical system. They had brilliant code breakers and endless time to study our messages. We needed something completely unfamiliar, something they could never anticipate, never analyze, and never break, even if they captured our radios. The existing American encryption methods were not only insecure, they were painfully slow. The M94 cipher machine took 30 minutes to encode a 3-line message and another 30 to decode it. In the fast-paced combat of the Pacific, that delay could mean disaster. Enter Philip Johnston. Born in 1892 in Topeka, Kansas, Johnston was not Navajo by birth. His parents were missionaries who moved to the Navajo reservation in Arizona when he was 4 years old. He grew up among the Navajo, learning their language and embracing their culture. By the age of 9, Johnston spoke Navajo fluently enough to act as interpreter for a tribal delegation traveling to Washington, D.C. to advocate for Native rights. By his teenage years, he was one of perhaps 30 non-Navajo people in the entire world who could speak the language with any degree of fluency. Johnston served in World War I, returned to Los Angeles, and worked as an engineer for the city water department. By December 1941, Philip Johnston was 49 years old, comfortably settled in his career, far removed from his childhood on the reservation. Then he read a newspaper article in February 1942 describing Army training maneuvers where Native American soldiers had transmitted messages in their tribal languages. Johnston understood something that few others in America could grasp. The Navajo language was not just difficult, it was virtually impossible for outsiders to learn. Navajo belongs to the Athabascan language family. It has no alphabet. No written form existed until American missionaries created one in the 1920s. The language relies heavily on tonal qualities where the same sound means different things depending on pitch and emphasis. Its syntax bears no resemblance to English, Japanese, German, or any European or Asian language. Johnston knew that during the 1920s and 30s, Germany and Japan had sent students to study Native American tribes. They had learned Cherokee, Chow, and Comanche, but they had never studied Navajo. The reservation was too isolated. The language was too difficult. The day after reading the article, Johnston went to the Naval Office in Los Angeles. He told them his idea: use Navajo speakers as radio operators. Let them transmit messages in their native language. The Japanese would never break it because they had no starting point, no reference, no way into the language. Johnston had 2 weeks to organize a demonstration. He found 4 Navajo volunteers in Los Angeles. On February 27, 1942, Johnston and his volunteers traveled to Camp Elliott. February 28, 1942, 0900 hours. Major Jones and Major General Clayton Vogel assembled in a communications room. They had invited skeptical staff officers. Everyone expected this demonstration to fail. Johnston placed 2 of his Navajo volunteers in one room, 2 in another room 50 yards away. He connected them by field telephone. Then he handed the first pair a written message in English. Enemy expected to make tank and dive bomber attack at dawn. The first Navajo man read the message, picked up the field telephone, and spoke in Navajo. 20 seconds. The receiving Navajo man wrote down the message in English. Enemy tank dive bomber expected to attack this morning, virtually verbatim. The machine translation would have taken 30 minutes and required code books that could be captured. Major Vogel immediately wrote a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. He recommended recruiting 200 Navajo men immediately. The letter was dated March 6, 1942. The Corps approved a pilot program, 30 Navajo recruits. If it worked, they would expand. On May 4, 1942, 29th Navajo men boarded a bus at Fort Defiance, Arizona. They were transported to Fort Wingate, New Mexico, then sent to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. These 29 would become known as the Original 29. They completed 7 weeks of standard Marine Corps boot camp. On June 27, 1942, Platoon 382 graduated. They were immediately sent to Camp Elliott for specialized training. Their mission was unprecedented. They had to create a military code using their own language. The challenge was formidable. Military communications required hundreds of specialized terms. Tank, submarine, artillery, battalion. The Navajo language had no words for these modern military concepts. The solution was brilliant. The Code Talkers created 2 types of code. Type 1 was an alphabet system. They assigned Navajo words to each letter of the English alphabet. But instead of using just 1 word per letter, they created multiple words to prevent frequency analysis. The letter A could be represented by wool L, which means ant, or basana, which means apple, or sinil, which means axe. This prevented Japanese cryptographers from using statistical analysis to break the code. Type 2 was direct word substitution for common military terms. Submarine became bashlo, which translates as ironfish. Battleship became lotso or whale. Fighter plane became dahi-tihi hummingbird. Bomber became JH show buzzard. The Code Talkers organized ships and aircraft by their characteristics. Ships were fish because they moved through water. Aircraft were birds because they flew. This system made intuitive sense to Navajo speakers but would be incomprehensible to outsiders. The original code contained 211 terms. Within months, it expanded to 401 military vocabulary terms. This final dictionary, combined with the Type 1 alphabet substitution system, created a code of remarkable depth and flexibility. Every term had to be memorized during training. Nothing was written down in the field. By August 1942, the original 29 had completed their training. They had created a fully functional military code using the Navajo language. They could encode, transmit, and decode messages at speeds that amazed their instructors. The Code Talkers began deploying to combat units in late 1942. The first group was assigned to the 1st Marine Division fighting at Guadalcanal. August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal. The first Navajo Code Talkers arrived in the combat zone and immediately went to work. Within hours, they were transmitting battlefield communications in their native language over open radio channels. The results astounded Marine commanders. Messages that previously took 30 minutes to encode and another 30 minutes to decode now flew across the airwaves in seconds. Artillery coordinates, enemy positions, troop movements, all transmitted instantly in a code that no one could break at Guadalcanal. Code Talkers worked around the clock in the oppressive heat and humidity of the Solomon Islands. They operated from foxholes, command posts, and forward observation positions. Despite these conditions, the Code Talkers maintained perfect accuracy in their transmissions. But the Code Talkers faced unexpected challenges beyond enemy fire. American Marines who'd never heard Navajo sometimes mistook the Code Talkers for Japanese infiltrators. The guttural sounds, the unfamiliar tones, the rapid speech patterns sounded nothing like English. Several Code Talkers reported being held at gunpoint by fellow Marines who suspected they were enemy soldiers. The solution was to assign each Code Talkera bodyguard who would protect them from both enemy action and friendly fire. The Japanese response to the Navajo transmissions revealed just how effective the code was. Japanese radio operators recorded every transmission. They sent the recordings to cryptographic units for analysis. Their results baffled them. Japanese intelligence had broken almost every American military code. They employed thousands of skilled cryptographers. They had unlimited time and resources. Yet the Navajo transmissions made no sense whatsoever. They tried frequency analysis, the standard method for breaking substitution codes. But the multiple substitutes for each letter defeated this approach. They tried comparing messages, looking for repeated phrases. But the Navajo Code Talkers varied their transmissions deliberately. Japanese intelligence tried linguistic analysis. They brought in every language expert they could find. None of them recognized the sounds. The language was unlike anything in their experience. The Japanese code name for the Navajo transmissions revealed their frustration. They called it the incomprehensible language. One report stated that the sounds appeared almost inhuman, as if American forces had developed some form of mechanical speech synthesizer. By late 1942, Japanese commanders were receiving warnings from their intelligence services. The Americans were using some form of unbreakable code on tactical communications. All attempts at decryption had failed. At Tarawa, in November 1943, Code Talkers transmitted and received over 800 messages during the 76-hour battle. Not a single error was recorded. Japanese forces intercepted many of these transmissions, but gained zero intelligence value from them. At Peleu, in September 1944, Code Talkers coordinated the entire amphibious assault. They handled all communications between ships, aircraft, and ground forces for 73 days under some of the worst conditions in the Pacific War. But the true test came at Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. 6 Navajo Code Talkers worked around the clock during the first 48 hours of the battle. They transmitted over 800 messages in 2 days. Every message was transmitted in Navajo. Every message was decoded instantly. Every message was completely accurate. Major Howard Connor stated it plainly in his after-action report. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. The Japanese never stopped trying to break the code. Even as their empire crumbled, their cryptographers continued working on the Navajo transmissions. They devoted significant resources to the problem. In one incident that revealed both Japanese determination and the code's strength, a Navajo army soldier named Joe Kiumia was captured at Bataan in April 1942. Kiumia was Navajo, fluent in the language, but he was not a code talker. He had never been trained in the code. Japanese intelligence officers brought Kiumia to a communications room. They played recordings of Navajo Code Talker transmissions. They ordered him to translate. Kiumia listened carefully. He heard Navajo words he recognized, but the messages made no sense. He heard words like wachu, which means ant. He heard bezlo, which means ironfish, but strung together, these words formed no coherent message. What Kiumia could not know was that these were code words. Valachi was the letter A. Beso meant submarine. Without training in the code, even a fluent Navajo speaker could not decode the messages. He told his captors the truth. The words were Navajo, but the message was gibberish. The Japanese did not believe him. They tortured him. They stripped him naked and forced him toasted in deep snow until his feet froze to the ground. This incident demonstrated the code's brilliance. Even a fluent Navajo speaker, who was not trained in the code, could not break it. After the war, Lieutenant General Kao Arisu, Japan's chief of intelligence, confirmed what many had suspected. Japanese cryptographers had broken numerous American codes throughout the war, but they never broke the Marine Corps code. They never even came close. By war's end, approximately 400 Navajomen had served as code talkers. 13 were killed in action. They served with all 6 Marine divisions. Their contribution was immeasurable, but when they came home in 1945 and 1946, there were no parades, no public recognition. They were ordered to maintain absolute secrecy about their service. The Codebreakers program remained classified. The military kept the code classified until 1968. The decision to keep the code classified for 23 years had profound implications. The code talkers could not speak about their service. They could not share their experiences with anyone outside the code talker community. Even when the program was declassified in 1968, public recognition came slowly. The code talkers themselves rarely spoke about their service. Many suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. But gradually recognition grew. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. In 2001, President George W. Bush presented gold medals to the 4 surviving members of the original 29. President Bush's remarks captured the significance of their achievement. Recall a story that all Americans can celebrate, and every American should know. It is a story of ancient people called to serve in a modern war. It is a story of the only unbreakable oral code of World War II. Above all, it is a story of young Navajos who brought honor to their nation and victory to their country. The Navajo Code Talkers faced a bitter irony. Many had attended government boarding schools where they were punished for speaking Navajo. American education policy sought to eliminate Native American languages and cultures. Yet in World War II, America needed these languages. The Code Talkers were asked to use the language they had been punished for speaking. They served anyway. This reflected a profound patriotism that transcended past injustices. When they returned home after the war, many struggled to access veterans' benefits. The reservation infrastructure did not support the GI Bill programs that transformed post-war America for white veterans. Yet, their legacy transformed American military communications. The success of the Navajo Code Talkers demonstrated that linguistic security could be just as powerful as technological security. Their story became a lasting symbol of Native American patriotism. Despite centuries of broken promises, forced removals, and systemic prejudice, Native Americans have served in every U.S. conflict at rates higher than any other ethnic group. The last of the original 29 Code Talkers, Chester Nez, passed away on June 4, 2014. At the age of 93, the numerical impact of the Code Talkers is difficult to measure, yet it remains undeniably profound. Tens of thousands of messages were sent without a single error over 3 years of combat. Transmission time dropped from 30 minutes to 20 seconds. The result? Perfect security against an enemy that had deciphered nearly every other American code. At Iwo Jima alone, the 6 Code Talkers working, during the first 48 hours, relayed information that directly influenced the survival of thousands of Marines. Their accomplishment revealed something extraordinary about human intellect and cultural depth. The most advanced cryptographic devices of the time could not match the protection provided by human language and memory. The legacy of the Code Talkers reaches far beyond their World War II service. They reshaped how America perceives its indigenous peoples. They proved that native languages and cultures were strengths, not weaknesses. Today, fewer than 200,000 people still speak Navajo. The language faces serious challenges, but the legacy of the Code Talkers has fueled efforts to preserve and revitalize it. They transformed their language from what once was viewed as a disadvantage into one of America's greatest wartime assets. They proved that indigenous wisdom holds power, that diversity strengthens rather than diminishes national defense. The Navajo Code Talkers left Japanese cryptographers completely confounded. They provided U.S. forces with a critical advantage, saved countless lives, and helped secure victory. And they achieved it all by speaking the language of their ancestors, a language that proved unbreakable when their nation needed it most. Breakable when their nation needed it most.